Chapter 1. Come Sunday, or I burn your stuff. The text came in at 6:14 p.m., right when the sky outside my apartment window was turning the color of bruised peaches. Come Sunday, or I burn your stuff. No greeting, no punctuation, no explanation. Just that. I stared at the screen until the letters stopped looking like words and started looking like a threat carved into wood. My phone buzzed again, as if impatient. You had plenty of time. I set the phone face down on the table and rubbed my eyes. The apartment was quiet in the way cheap places always are. Thin walls, old pipes, a refrigerator that hummed like it was thinking too hard. This was what she'd left me with. Not even left a sign like a punishment. She already had the house. The big one with the white fence and the maple tree Sophie used to climb before I yelled at her to be careful. She already had the savings account, the retirement fund, the joint credit cards she maxed out before the ink on the divorce papers dried. And she had custody, sole custody. I got weekends when she felt like honoring them. Now she wanted the last scraps. The boxes still in the garage. My tools. Old photos. Sophie's drawings I hadn't had the strength to take yet. Things that smelled like the life I used to have. Burn your stuff, I muttered aloud, tasting the words. Jesus. I picked the phone back up and typed, I'll be there Sunday morning. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Don't be late. That was it. Conversation over. I leaned back in my chair and let my head thump gently against the wall. 6 months divorced. 3 months since Sophie died. And she was still finding new ways to hurt me. Like pain was a hobby she refused to quit. They said Sophie's death was an accident. A fall down the stairs. That's what the report said. That's what everyone said, their voices careful and rehearsed, like they were afraid the truth might shatter if they spoke it too loudly. I nodded along, signed forms with shaking hands, thanked people I didn't remember. But accidents don't keep you awake at night. I could still see her at the bottom of those stairs when I closed my eyes. Too still, too quiet. Her hair splayed out like she'd just lain down to rest. And the strangest part, what never fit no matter how many times I replayed it, was the lack of noise. Sophie was loud. She cried when she scraped her knee. She screamed when she was scared. According to my ex-wife, Sophie hadn't made a sound. I'd swallowed that lie because the alternative was unthinkable. I pushed away from the table and crossed the room to the small couch, where Caleb's jacket was draped over the arm. He'd forgotten it last weekend. Again, he forgot things a lot lately. Shoes, homework, words. He used to talk nonstop, narrating his entire world like it was a documentary only he could see. Now getting a full sentence out of him felt like prying open a locked door. Last Sunday, when I dropped him back at the house, he'd stood on the porch gripping the strap of his backpack with both hands. You okay, buddy? I'd asked. He nodded too fast. Wouldn't look at me. You sure? Another nod. Smaller this time. I'd crouched down to his level. You can tell me anything, you know that. His mouth opened. Closed. He glanced past me, toward the front door, like it might be listening. I gotta go, he whispered, and before I could say anything else, the door had opened and she was there, smiling that tight smile she used when other people were watching. Now, alone in my apartment, that moment replayed itself with sharper edges. The way his shoulders hunched, the way he flinched when the door slammed behind him, the way his eyes had looked older than 10-year-old eyes should ever look. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet, staring at the half-empty hangers. Everything important was already gone. She'd been thorough, efficient, like she always was when she decided something needed to be erased. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of Sophie and Caleb at the beach, both of them squinting into the sun, arms thrown around each other. I picked it up and traced Sophie's face with my thumb. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I should have fought harder. The words hung in the air, unanswered. I went back into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, though my hands were shaking too much to drink it. The text echoed in my head again. Come Sunday, or I burn your stuff. Sunday. Tomorrow. That was the plan. That was always the plan. Do what she said. Don't provoke her. Keep things calm for Caleb's sake. I learned the hard way that pushing back only made her crueler. But this time, something in my chest refused to settle. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was a feeling I hadn't been able to name since Sophie's funeral. A low, crawling pressure behind my ribs. The same feeling I got when I stood at the top of those stairs, staring down, knowing something was wrong even before anyone told me. I checked the clock. 7:02 p.m. I imagined waiting until Sunday. Imagined sleeping tonight, waking up, driving over in daylight like a good, obedient ex-husband. Imagined smiling tightly, loading boxes under her watchful eyes, pretending everything was fine. My stomach twisted. I thought of Caleb again, of his silence, of the way he'd whispered, "I gotta go," like it was a confession. "Burn your stuff," I said aloud, sharper now. Over my dead body. I grabbed my keys from the counter, then stopped, my hand hovering. This was how trouble started. Showing up unannounced. Going off script. She'd accuse me of harassment, of violating boundaries. She called the police just to prove she could. I could already hear her voice. "You're overreacting. You always do." I paced the apartment, back and forth, the floorboards creaking under my feet. Every instinct I'd learned to ignore during the marriage was screaming now, loud and insistent. Something was wrong. Not with the stuff. Not with the threat. With my son. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Caleb's contact. Stared at it. If I called, she'd answer. Or she'd see the missed call and make his life harder for it. I slid the phone back into my pocket. "Just take a look," I told myself. "That's all. You don't have to go inside. Just see." The lie was thin, but it was enough. I shrugged on my jacket, grabbed my wallet, and paused one last time by the door. Sophie's photo caught my eye again from across the room. "If I'm wrong," I whispered, "I'll turn around." I locked the apartment behind me and walked down the stairs into the cooling evening. The parking lot smelled like oil and damp concrete. I slid into my car, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The engine turned over with a low growl. Sunday could wait. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward the old house, the sky darkening ahead of me as I drove there Saturday night. Chapter 2. Lights on. Laughter inside. The house looked alive. That was the first thing that hit me as I turned onto the street, how alive it looked. Every window was lit, warm yellow spilling out onto the lawn like nothing bad had ever happened inside those walls. Cars lined the curb where mine used to sit. A red SUV, a dented pickup. Someone's motorcycle leaned on its kickstand near the mailbox, chrome glinting under the streetlight. Music thumped faintly even with my windows rolled up. Something upbeat, carefree. I slowed without meaning to, my foot easing off the gas as if the sight alone had reached out and pressed down. For a second, I wondered if I had the wrong house. Then I saw the maple tree in the yard, the one Sophie used to climb until my ex-wife yelled that she'd rip her dress, and I knew. This was it. I parked half a block away, instinct more than caution, and shut off the engine. The sudden silence inside the car made the music from the house feel louder by comparison, a distant pulse under everything. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the place that had been my home for 12 years. A laugh burst out from inside the house, high and sharp, a woman's voice. It floated out through an open window, unbothered by the night. "They're having a party," I muttered. The idea felt obscene. 3 months since Sophie was buried, and there were people drinking and laughing under the same roof where her bedroom still was, where her shoes might still be by the door, where her height was still penciled into the kitchen wall, frozen forever at 6 years old. I got out of the car and walked toward the house, each step heavy, like I was wading through something thick. Gravel crunched under my shoes. The music grew clearer, bass thudding, voices overlapping. Someone cheered. Someone else shushed them, laughing as they did it. The porch light was on, bright, welcoming, like I was expected. I stopped at the edge of the lawn and just stood there, watching the shadows move behind the curtains. I recognized the couch through the front window, the one I'd picked out, gray fabric that showed every spill. A man I didn't know sat on it now, beer in hand, head thrown back in laughter. My chest tightened. I moved around the side of the house instead of going up to the door. I didn't know why yet. I just knew I couldn't walk in smiling, couldn't pretend this was normal. The grass was damp, cool through the soles of my shoes. The smell of grilled meat hung in the air, mixed with cigarette smoke. The kitchen window was open. I slowed, peering in. My ex-wife stood at the counter, a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at something the man beside her said. Her hair was done. Makeup perfect. She looked relaxed, happy, like a woman unburdened by grief or memory. For a split second, anger flared hot and sudden. How dare you, I thought. How dare you laugh here? I kept moving. The back door was propped open with a cooler, voices spilling out onto the patio. Someone I didn't recognize glanced my way, then looked through me like I was nothing. I realized then how invisible I was here, how completely erased. This wasn't my house anymore. It was a stage, and everyone inside was playing a part. I rounded the corner toward the back of the house, where the yard sloped gently down. The basement windows were there, small, rectangular, half buried in concrete. I remembered kneeling beside one years ago, showing Caleb how to wave at me from inside while I pretended to be a giant outside the glass. He'd laughed so hard he'd fallen over. The music dulled as I moved farther from the open doors and windows. It was still there, but muffled now, like a party happening underwater. The laughter faded into something indistinct. I stopped. There was again. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or the house settling. The mind fills in gaps when it wants to be afraid. I held my breath, listening. The sound came again, thin, uneven. A sob. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. No, I whispered. No, no. I stood perfectly still, every muscle locked, straining to separate imagination from reality. The music inside the house surged. Someone turned it up, the bass rattling faintly through the siding. And under it, barely audible but unmistakable, was crying. Not laughter. Not a drunk voice raised too loud. A child. My mouth went dry. I took a step closer to the house, then another, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. The sound wavered, cut off for a moment, then returned, broken, desperate, like someone trying not to be heard. Caleb, I called softly before I could stop myself. No answer. I crouched near the basement window, my knees protesting as they bent. The glass was fogged from the inside, smeared with something that might have been fingerprints. I wiped a small circle clear with my sleeve and leaned closer. The music inside the house swelled again, laughter rolling over everything like it could drown out anything ugly beneath it. The crying came again, closer now that I was down low. There was no mistaking it. The sound rose and fell, hitching on each breath, the way kids cry when they're trying to be brave. My stomach dropped. I pressed my ear closer to the glass. Hey, I whispered, my voice shaking. Hey, it's Dad. The crying didn't stop. I pulled back, heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. My mind raced, grasping for explanations that didn't make sense. A guest kid having a meltdown. A TV turned up too loud downstairs. Anything that didn't end with the thought clawing its way to the surface. That's coming from a basement. I stood up too fast, the world tilting for a second before snapping back into place. I looked toward the back door again. People were still laughing. Someone clinked bottles together in a toast. None of them looked worried. I walked toward the foundation, following the sound, each step more certain than the last. The crying was clearer now, leaking out through the concrete and glass, a thin thread of pain no amount of music could fully hide. My hand hovered near the basement door handle. Whatever was happening down there, it wasn't part of the party, and I was done pretending I didn't hear it. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and moved toward the basement door. Chapter 3. Mom says this is discipline. I wiped the basement window again with my sleeve. Harder this time, like friction alone could erase what I was afraid to see. The glass cleared just enough. At first, my brain refused to assemble the picture. Shapes without meaning. A shadow where a person should be. Something metallic catching the light. I leaned closer, breath fogging the glass, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Then he shifted. Caleb, I breathed. He was sitting on the concrete floor, back pressed against a vertical pipe that ran from the ceiling into the ground. His knees were pulled up to his chest, bare feet dirty and scraped. His wrists were raised above his head, arms trembling, metal cuffs locked around them, handcuffs secured to the pipe with a short length of chain. For a split second, I honestly thought I was hallucinating. That grief had finally broken something in me, twisted reality into a nightmare my mind couldn't escape. Then Caleb looked up. Our eyes met through the glass. His face changed, not relief, not hope. Fear. Raw. Immediate fear, like a trapped animal that knows being seen can make things worse. He shook his head once, a tiny movement, almost imperceptible. Don't. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up right there in the yard. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Bruises bloomed across his arms and neck in shades of purple and yellow, some old, some new. His cheeks were hollow in a way they hadn't been weeks ago. He looked smaller, like someone had taken pieces of him away one day at a time. I staggered back from the window, gasping, air burning my throat. The party noises from upstairs drifted down through the walls. Music, laughter, the glass breaking followed by cheers. Something inside me snapped clean in two. I ran. I didn't go around to the basement door. I didn't knock. I didn't think. I sprinted back, toward the patio, shoved past a startled man, holding a beer. Hey, what the hell? He started. I didn't stop. I kicked the back door open so hard it slammed against the wall, rattling picture frames. Conversations died mid-sentence. Music stuttered as someone reached for the volume. My ex-wife turned, wine sloshing over the rim of her glass. What are you doing here? She snapped, eyes flashing. You can't just barge in. Where's my son? I roared. The room froze. Faces stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. What are you talking about? She said sharply, recovering fast. Caleb's fine. You're upsetting everyone. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I pushed past her, shoulder-checking a man I didn't recognize who tried to block me. Hey, someone yelled. You can't. I was already at the basement door. It was locked. Of course it was. I slammed my fist against it once, twice. Caleb, I shouted. It's Dad. Footsteps pounded behind me. Stop it, my ex-wife screamed. You're acting crazy. Crazy. I kicked the door near the latch. Pain exploded up my leg, but the cheap wood splintered. A second kick sent the door flying inward with a crack that echoed through the house. Cold air rushed up from below, damp and sour. The basement light was on. I took the stairs 3 at a time, nearly falling as my foot slipped on the narrow steps. My heart was in my throat, every beat screaming too late, too late, too late. Caleb, I yelled again. I'm here, came a small voice. I'm here. I hit the bottom of the stairs and saw him fully for the first time. Seeing him through the window had been bad. Seeing him like this, up close, shaking, eyes too big in his face, was something else entirely. His lips were split. A faint red mark circled one ankle like a forgotten bracelet. Dad, he whispered, voice cracking. I crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to my knees in front of him, hands hovering uselessly for half a second because I was afraid to hurt him. What did they do to you? I demanded, already reaching for the cuffs. Oh my God. Caleb, don't, he said quickly, eyes darting toward the stairs. She'll get mad. Something inside my chest caved in. I fumbled with the cuffs, fingers clumsy, adrenaline making everything harder. Who did this? I asked. Was it him? Caleb swallowed. Mom, he said softly. I froze. What? He looked down at his wrists, then back up at me, shame flooding his face like this was somehow his fault. His voice dropped to a whisper, so quiet I had to lean in to hear it. Mom says this is discipline. The words hit me harder than any punch ever could. Discipline. I saw red. Hot, blinding, all-consuming. This isn't discipline, I growled, yanking my keys from my pocket. This is abuse. I jammed the key into the cuff, twisting until the lock clicked open. One wrist came free, then the other. The chain clattered to the floor, loud and final. Caleb sagged forward instantly, his arms giving out now that they weren't held up by metal. I caught him, pulling him against my chest, wrapping my arms around his thin body. He broke. Sobs tore out of him, loud and uncontrollable, his face buried in my jacket as his whole body shook. I held him tight, one hand cradling the back of his head, the other pressed between his shoulder blades like I could keep him from falling apart if I just held on hard enough. It's okay. I murmured over and over, my own voice cracking. It's okay. I've got you. I've got you. I try to be good, he cried. I really did. I know. I said, tears blurring my vision. I know you did. Footsteps sounded on the stairs above, voices raised in confusion, anger, fear. I didn't care. Nothing existed outside this room. I rocked him gently, breathing him in, counting each inhale like it was proof he was still alive. The smell of damp concrete mixed with sweat and something metallic I didn't want to identify. Gradually, his sobs slowed. His grip on my jacket loosened, though he didn't let go entirely. I'm taking you home, I said firmly. Right now. No one is ever doing this to you again. He nodded against my chest, exhausted, eyes fluttering shut for a moment like his body couldn't keep up anymore. I pulled back just enough to look at him, brushing his hair off his forehead. That's when I noticed how cold the room felt. How empty. Too empty. My gaze drifted past him, scanning the basement properly for the first time, the bare concrete walls, the single bulb hanging from the ceiling, the stains I hadn't wanted to name. And then I saw it. Something else in the room that didn't belong. Something that made my blood run cold. And I understood, in that terrible instant, that the nightmare wasn't over at all. Chapter 4, Don't Look Up. At first, my brain tried to protect me. It offered excuses, misreadings, coincidences, anything but the truth. My eyes had landed on it without meaning to. The second pipe bolted into the concrete floor a few feet away from where Caleb had been chained. It stood parallel to the first, identical in height and thickness, rising straight up into the ceiling like a mute witness. I told myself it was nothing. Old plumbing, a support, something left over from when the house was built. Then I saw what was attached to it. Smaller handcuffs. They hung there loosely, open, one cuff resting against the pipe, the other dangling on a short length of chain. The metal was dull, scuffed, worn smooth in places that shouldn't have been smooth at all. My breath hitched. No, I whispered, the word barely forming. No, no, no. I took a step toward it without realizing I'd moved. My knees felt weak, like the bones inside them had turned to chalk. I stared at the cuffs, unable to look away, my mind racing backward through memories it suddenly reclassified as warnings. Sophie crying when it was time to go back to her mother's. Sophie wetting the bed after the divorce. Sophie clinging to me at drop-offs like she knew something I didn't. Dad, Caleb said. His hand shot out and grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength, fingers digging into my arm like anchors. His grip stopped me cold. Don't, he whispered. I looked down at him. His face had gone pale, all the color drained away, his eyes wide and pleading. Don't look up. The words didn't make sense at first. I frowned, confused, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Caleb, I said gently, it's okay. He shook his head violently, tears welling up again. Please, he whispered, please don't. Something in his voice, a broken, desperate edge, told me I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't come back from. My gaze flicked from his face to the pipe, and then, despite every instinct screaming at me to stop, it followed the line of that pipe upward. I looked up. The ceiling beam ran horizontally across the basement, thick and dark with age. At first glance, it looked like any other old piece of wood, rough, splintered, forgotten. Then the light caught the scratches. They were shallow but deliberate, carved again and again into the wood by something small and sharp. Fingernails. A piece of metal. I didn't know, and I didn't want to. 3 words were etched into the beam, uneven and trembling, like they'd been written by a hand that couldn't stop shaking. Sophie was here. The room tilted. I reached out blindly, my hand brushing the cold pipe to steady myself. My ears rang, a high-pitched whine drowning out everything else. For a second, I thought I might faint. Then I saw the marks. Tallies. Dozens of them. They were carved into the beam beside the words, grouped in 5s the way people count days when they're trying not to lose their minds. Some were deep and dark. Others were lighter, rushed, as if whoever made them had been weak or in pain. I counted without meaning to. Once. Twice. Again, slower this time. 47. The number landed in my chest like a cinder block. 47 days. I stared at those marks, my vision blurring as understanding crept in piece by piece, cruel and methodical. This wasn't a message scribbled on a whim. This wasn't graffiti. This was a record. A calendar scratched into wood by a 6-year-old girl who didn't know if anyone would ever come for her. No, I breathed again, but the word had lost all meaning. My legs gave out, and I sank down onto the concrete floor, my back against the wall, my head tipping forward into my hands. I pressed my palms into my eyes like I could erase what I'd seen if I just pushed hard enough. Images assaulted me without mercy. Sophie sitting on this floor. Sophie reaching up on her tiptoes, wrists pulled high, crying until her throat hurt. Sophie counting days, because time was the only thing she still had control over. 47 days. I felt Caleb shift beside me. He stayed close, his shoulder pressed against mine, like he was afraid if he let go I might disappear. She was scared, he whispered. My heart shattered completely then, breaking into pieces so small I didn't know how I was still breathing. Did she? I couldn't finish the question. My voice died halfway out my throat. Caleb nodded once, slowly. She cried for you, he said. A lot. The words hollowed me out. I imagined her calling my name down here, her voice swallowed by concrete and music and laughter upstairs. Imagine myself sitting in my apartment, watching TV, believing she was safe because I wanted to believe it. I pressed my forehead to the floor, the cold seeping into my skin. A sound tore out of me, something between a sob and a growl, raw, an animal, and completely uncontrollable. I should have known, I choked. I should have known. Caleb didn't say anything. He didn't argue. He just leaned into me, his small body warm against my side, sharing the weight of a truth too big for either of us to carry alone. I forced myself to look up again, though every fiber of my being resisted. The scratches looked different now. Each tally wasn't just a mark. It was a day Sophie woke up here. A day she didn't know if she'd see the sun. A day she survived. Until she didn't. The basement felt smaller with every breath, the walls closing in, the ceiling pressing down. The air smelled wrong. Everything smelled wrong. This wasn't just a room. It was a grave she'd lived in before she died. My hands curled into fists, nails biting into my palms hard enough to draw blood. Rage burned through me, bright and furious, but it was smothered under something heavier. Grief. Guilt. The unbearable weight of understanding settling fully into place. Sophie hadn't fallen down the stairs. She had been here for weeks, and I hadn't saved her. The realization crushed down on me, heavy and absolute, until there was nothing left to do but sit there on the cold basement floor and let it bury me alive. Chapter 5. The truth my son was forced to bury. Caleb didn't cry right away. That was the worst part. He sat there beside me on the cold basement floor, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around himself like he was trying to hold his body together. His breathing was shallow and uneven, each inhale catching like it hurt. His eyes were fixed on the concrete in front of him, staring at a dark stain neither of us acknowledged. "Buddy," I said softly, my voice hoarse. "You're safe now. You don't have to be scared anymore." He nodded, but it was automatic. Empty. "I need you to tell me," I continued, swallowing hard. "I need to know what happened." "About Sophie." His jaw tightened. For a long moment, I thought he might shut down completely, retreat into that quiet place I'd seen so many times since the divorce. Then his shoulders began to shake. It started as a tremor. Then it broke wide open. "I didn't want her to die," he sobbed, the words spilling out in a rush like he'd been holding them back for months. "I swear, Dad, I didn't want her to die." I pulled him into my arms again, holding him as he collapsed against me, his cries ripping through the basement, raw and unfiltered. He clutched my shirt with both hands, knuckles white. "I know," I said over and over. "I know. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." He cried like he'd been waiting for permission. When he finally managed to speak again, his voice was small and broken, like it belonged to someone much younger than 10. "She didn't fall," he whispered. The words sank into me slowly, settling deep in my chest where denial had been trying to live. "She didn't fall down the stairs," he repeated. "Mom said to tell everyone that. She practiced it with me." My heart clenched, so hard it felt like it might tear itself apart. "Practice?" I asked. He nodded against my shoulder. "She made me say it again and again. Sophie slipped. Sophie slipped." If I messed up, she'd get mad. I closed my eyes, breathing through the surge of rage and helplessness threatening to choke me. Tell me what really happened, I said gently. Only if you can. Caleb sniffed, wiping his nose on his sleeve without seeming to notice. They said it was punishment, he said, when Sophie was bad, or when he said she was bad. I asked, though I already knew. Mom's boyfriend. Caleb nodded. He didn't like noise, he whispered. He said kids needed to learn. My grip tightened around him. They started putting her down here more, Caleb continued, his words halting, like each one cost him something. At first it was just a little while. An hour. Then longer. They said she needed to think about what she'd done. What did she do? I asked, my voice shaking despite myself. He shrugged helplessly. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she asked for you. That broke something in me. She cried for me? I asked, my voice barely audible. Caleb nodded, tears spilling again. All the time. She kept saying you'd come. That you always came. I pressed my face in his hair, breathing him in, trying not to drown in the image of my little girl down here, believing in me even when I wasn't there. One night, Caleb said after a long pause, his voice dropping to a whisper, she didn't stop crying. My chest tightened. He got really mad, Caleb went on. He said she was being dramatic. Mom told him to calm down, but she didn't make him stop. My nails dug into my palm. She was tired, Caleb said. She said her arms hurt. She asked if she could sleep. They said no. They said she had to learn. I felt sick. I went to bed, Caleb whispered. I could still hear her from my room, crying, calling your name. My vision blurred completely now, tears spilling freely down my face. Then it got quiet, he said. The silence between his words was unbearable. I waited, Caleb continued. I thought she was sleeping. In the morning, Mom told me Sophie had an accident. She told me not to go downstairs. I swallowed hard. What about the marks? I asked. The writing. Caleb hesitated, then said, Sophie did that. She said if she didn't come back, someone needed to know she was here. My breath hitched violently. She counted the days, he said. She said it helped her not get lost. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking. They told me it was discipline, Caleb said again, bitterness creeping into his small voice. They said if I talked, I'd go down there too. Or worse. My heart shattered all over again. They made me lie, he whispered. To the police. To the doctor. To you. I pulled back just enough to look at him. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, though I already hated myself for even asking. He flinched. Because I was scared, he said. And because Mom said you wouldn't believe me. She said you already chose her. The words cut deeper than any blade. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I should have seen it. I should have protected you both. Caleb shook his head weakly. She said you were busy. She said Sophie was sick. She said it was normal. Normal. I laughed once, a hollow, broken sound that echoed off the basement walls. This isn't normal, I said fiercely. This is evil. Caleb leaned into me again, exhausted, spent. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing and the faint thrum of music from upstairs, still playing, still mocking us with its false joy. I wiped my face with my sleeve, trying to steady myself. You did the bravest thing, I told him. You survived, and you told me. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the stairs. I followed his gaze. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Coming down from upstairs. Chapter 6. Monsters don't look like monsters. The footsteps reached the bottom stair. I stood, pulling Caleb up with me, instinctively placing myself between him and the doorway. My hands were still shaking, but my body felt solid, anchored by something heavy and immovable. Rage, maybe, or resolve, probably both. My ex-wife appeared first, one manicured hand on the railing, her face already arranged into something annoyed rather than alarmed. What's going on down here? She demanded, eyes flicking past me to Caleb, then back to me. You're making a scene. Behind her, her boyfriend followed, filling the doorway with his broad shoulders and smug posture. He smelled like beer and cologne, the kind meant to announce itself before the man did. He took in the broken door, the open cuffs on the floor, the way I was holding my son, and he smiled. Wow, he said lightly. You really went off the deep end this time. Caleb flinched. I felt it through my arm. Stay behind me, I murmured without looking back. My ex-wife sighed like I'd spilled something inconvenient. This is exactly what I was talking about, she said, turning to her boyfriend. He always does this. Storms in, scares the kids, plays the hero. I stared at her, disbelief giving way to something colder. You chained him to a pipe, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She rolled her eyes. It's discipline. You wouldn't understand. You were never good with follow-through. Discipline? I barked a laugh, sharp and humorless. You call this discipline? The boyfriend shrugged. Kids troubled, he said. You can't let them run wild. Sometimes they need structure. Caleb's fingers dug into my jacket. Don't talk about him, I snapped. You don't get to say his name. My ex-wife crossed her arms. Lower your voice, she said. There are people upstairs. I gestured wildly around the basement. Oh, I know. The party. The music. The laughter. While my son is chained in a basement. He wasn't chained, she said quickly. He was restrained. There's a difference. Something in me snapped again, clean and sharp. You touch him again, I said, stepping forward just enough to make my point clear, and I will end you. Her boyfriend's smile faded. You're threatening me now? I'm promising you, I said. My ex-wife scoffed. You think anyone's going to believe this? She glanced at Caleb. He lies. You know that. He's emotional. Ever since Sophie. Don't, I warned. He needs help, she continued smoothly. Real help, not your dramatics. We were handling it. I felt Caleb trembling behind me, his breath coming fast. You were torturing him, I said. And Sophie. Her face hardened for a split second, just long enough for the truth to slip through, before she smoothed it away. That's enough, she snapped. You're done here. Put him down and leave, or I'm calling the police. Go ahead, I said. She blinked. What? Call them, I repeated. Tell them everything. Her boyfriend stepped forward, voice dropping. You don't want to do this, he said. You have no idea how bad this can get for you. You kick in a door, kid gets hurt. Guess who they blame? I leaned in, close enough to smell the beer on his breath. Step back, I said quietly. He didn't. So I shifted, placing my body squarely between him and Caleb, one arm shielding my son, the other clenched into a fist I was barely controlling. My ex-wife's voice sharpened. You're not taking him. I am, I said. Right now. You don't have custody. I don't care. You'll lose everything, she hissed. I'll make sure of it. I looked at Caleb. His eyes were wide, wet, fixed on me like I was the only solid thing left in the world. I don't care, I said again. I bent, scooped Caleb up into my arms, and turned toward the stairs. My ex-wife lunged forward. You put him down. Her boyfriend moved too fast, grabbing my shoulder. I spun, knocking his hand away. Touch me again, I warned, and this ends very differently. For a moment, no one moved. The basement felt like it was holding its breath. Then my ex-wife laughed, short and sharp. You're unbelievable, she said. You think this makes you some kind of savior? You abandoned us. You don't get to rewrite history. I didn't abandon my children, I said. I trusted you. That shut her up. I took the stairs one step at a time, every muscle coiled, expecting them to rush me from behind. They didn't. The music upstairs faltered as we emerged, partygoers staring in confusion as I carried my son through the living room. Call the police, my ex-wife shouted after us. He's kidnapping my child. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air hit us hard and cold. Caleb buried his face in my shoulder, clinging to me like he was afraid the ground might disappear. I set him gently into the passenger seat of my car, buckled him in with shaking hands. You're okay, I told him. I've got you. I shut the door, walked around to the driver's side, and slid in. My hands trembled so badly I had to grip the steering wheel until they steadied. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't answer. I drove 2 blocks, then pulled over and called the police myself. My name is I swallowed. My son has been abused. I found him restrained in a basement. There's evidence. Please send someone. Now. I hung up and sat there, engine idling, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over to rest on Caleb's knee. In the distance, faint at first, then growing louder, sirens began to wail. Chapter 7. Sophie was here. The police arrived in waves. First 2 cruisers, lights washing the house in red and blue. Then an unmarked sedan. Then an ambulance no one asked for, but everyone understood. The party upstairs evaporated in minutes. Guests spilling out onto the lawn with confused faces and open mouths. Phones already raised, stories already forming that they didn't yet understand. I stood beside my car with Caleb pressed against my side, my arm locked around his shoulders like a seatbelt I refused to unbuckle. An officer with a kind face knelt in front of him, speaking softly, slow and careful. "You did the right thing," she told him. "You're very brave." Caleb nodded once. Didn't speak. Another officer approached me, notebook out, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Sir, we're going to need you to walk us through everything again." I nodded. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. I told them about the text, about coming Saturday night, about the crying, about the basement. I didn't embellish. I didn't soften anything. I said handcuffed to a pipe and watched his jaw tighten. When I finished, he closed his notebook slowly. "We're going to secure the house," he said. "No one leaves." Inside, boots thudded across hardwood. Radios crackled. The music was off now, replaced by a different kind of noise, measured, purposeful, serious. A detective emerged from the back door 20 minutes later, his face pale, eyes distant. He looked at me like he was trying to decide how much truth a person could survive. "Sir," he said, "can you come with me?" I glanced at Caleb. Another officer stepped closer. "I'll stay with him," she said gently. "I'll be right here," I promised my son, squeezing his shoulder. The basement felt colder than before, though nothing had changed. The cuffs lay where I dropped them. The broken door hung crooked on its hinges. 2 detectives stood near the second pipe. One crouched, one staring upward. The crouched one looked up at me. "You said you saw writing?" I nodded. My throat closed as I followed his gaze. They had set up a portable light now, angled toward the beam. The words stood out stark and unmistakable. "Sophie was here." One of the detectives exhaled slowly. "Jesus." Another counted under his breath, finger tracing the tallies. 47, he said. 47 days. A uniformed officer turned away abruptly, hand over his mouth. "This wasn't discipline," the detective said quietly. "This was prolonged confinement. Torture." I pressed my hand to the wall to steady myself. They photographed everything. The pipes, the cuffs, the scratches. One detective carefully bagged the cuffs like they were fragile glass instead of steel. Another took samples from a floor, his movements precise, almost reverent. Upstairs, voices rose, angry now. Panicked. My ex-wife's voice cut through the noise. "This is insane. You can't just, I want a lawyer." Her boyfriend wasn't shouting. He was laughing. Short, sharp bursts. The sound made my skin crawl. When they brought them down the stairs, cuffed and furious, my ex-wife's eyes found mine instantly. "This is your fault," she spat. "You always do this. You ruin everything." I didn't answer. Her boyfriend leaned toward me as they passed. "You think you won?" he said softly. "This isn't over." An officer shoved him forward. "Keep moving." Outside, neighbors gathered on porches, whispers spreading like smoke. The ambulance doors opened and closed again, empty. No one needed a stretcher now. The damage had already been done. A social worker arrived with a clipboard and tired eyes. She crouched in front of Caleb and spoke to him in a voice that sounded practiced but sincere. "Caleb," she said, "we're going to make sure you're safe tonight. You'll stay with your dad, okay?" Caleb looked up at me, searching my face. "I'm not going back," he asked, barely above a whisper. "No," I said firmly. "You're staying with me." He nodded and leaned into my side, relief loosening something in his posture I hadn't seen in months. Inside the house, the detectives kept working. Hours passed in strange, disjointed fragments. Coffee appeared in paper cups. Statements were taken. Forms were signed. Time lost its shape. A detective pulled me aside near dawn. His voice was low, serious. "We're reopening your daughter's case." My breath caught. "Because of the basement? Because of the evidence," he said. "And because of that message." He looked back toward the house. Without the writing on that beam, this would be a lot harder. They'd argue fabrication, coaching, anything to muddy the water. I swallowed. "But she wrote it," I said. She left it. He nodded slowly. She knew. The weight of that settled over me, heavy and awful and beautiful all at once. Sophie had understood, in her own small way, that truth mattered, that someone needed to know she'd been there. Later, as the sun crept up behind the houses, another officer came to tell me the arrests were official. Charges pending. Serious ones. Caleb slept in the back seat of my car, curled in on himself, exhaustion finally winning. I watched his chest rise and fall, each breath a quiet miracle. The detective stood beside me, hands on his hips. "Your daughter," he said carefully. "She left us a map." I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "She didn't just leave proof," he continued. "She left a timeline. She left intent. She left us a way to protect her brother." I looked at the house one last time, the lights now off, the windows dark and empty. Sophie hadn't fallen. She had spoken. She had carved her name into the dark so someone would find it. She left proof. And because she did, her brother was alive. Chapter 8. The Truth They Couldn't Bury. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where the sky looks unfinished. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my new apartment, a mug of coffee going cold between my hands, watching Caleb color silently across from me. He still colored inside the lines like rules mattered more than joy. Therapy had started, but healing moved at its own pace. "Mr. Harris?" the voice on the phone asked. "Yes, this is Detective Morales. We've received the court order." I closed my eyes. I already knew what he meant. "They're going to exhume her," I said. "Yes, sir." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for a long time, staring at the place on the wall where Sophie's drawings would have been if this were still our old house. Caleb looked up. "Is it about Sophie?" "Yes," I said quietly. "They need to look again, to tell the truth." He nodded, accepting it with a gravity no child should have to carry. The cemetery was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if even the birds knew better than to intrude. I stood back with Caleb's grandmother while men in dark coats worked carefully, respectfully. No one rushed. No one spoke above a whisper. The earth came away slowly, shovel by shovel, each sound landing in my chest like a dull thud. I didn't look when they lifted the casket. I couldn't. Later, in a sterile room that smelled like disinfectant and metal, the forensic pathologist spoke in a voice trained to stay calm even when delivering horror. "We found multiple fractures," she said, hands folded. "Some recent, some in various stages of healing." My jaw tightened. "Arms, ribs, a hairline fracture in the collarbone," she continued. "None consistent with a single fall." She paused, letting that sink in. "There were also marks on her wrists and ankles," she said carefully. "Scarring consistent with restraints." My stomach turned. "And signs of malnutrition," she added. "Not starvation, but prolonged deprivation." I felt like I was sinking into the floor. "The cause of death," she said, finally, "was blunt force trauma. Prolonged, not accidental." I stared at the table between us, my hands clenched so tightly my nails left half-moon marks in my palms. "They staged it," I said. She nodded once. "Yes." Outside, the sun was bright and cruel, the world continuing on like nothing had changed. The official report came a week later. Cause of death: homicide. Manner of death: abuse over an extended period of time. The words were clean. Clinical. They didn't scream the way I wanted them to. The news reopened everything. Sophie's case was no longer a tragedy. It was a crime. And now, they needed Caleb. The prosecutor explained it gently, sitting across from us in a small conference room with neutral walls. "He won't have to be in the courtroom," she said. "We'll record his testimony. Video only. You'll be nearby the entire time." Caleb sat very still, hands folded in his lap. "Do I have to?" he asked. She met his eyes. "You don't have to do anything," she said. "But what you know matters." He looked at me. I swallowed. "I'll be right there," I said. "The whole time." He nodded. The room was small. A camera, a chair, a box of tissues on the table, like an afterthought. Caleb climbed onto the chair, feet not quite touching the floor. The woman behind the camera smiled softly. "Whenever you're ready," she said. Caleb took a breath that shook on the way out. "They said Sophie fell," he began. "But she didn't." The words came slowly at first, then faster as something unlocked inside him. They put her in the basement, he said, when they were mad. Or when he was mad. Who is he? The prosecutor asked gently. Mom's boyfriend. Caleb stared at his hands. He said she cried too much. He said it was annoying. He swallowed. The last night, Caleb continued, voice trembling, she asked if she could sleep. Her arms hurt. She said she was tired. I closed my eyes. He told her no, Caleb said. He said she had to learn. Silence filled the room, thick and unbearable. I heard her crying for Dad, he whispered. Then it stopped. The prosecutor waited. Didn't rush him. In the morning, Caleb said, Mom told me Sophie fell. She made me practice saying it, over and over. She said if I messed up, I'd go in the basement too. He looked up then, eyes bright with tears. She said you wouldn't believe me. I felt something tear inside my chest. They told me to smile, he added. At the hospital, at the funeral, the camera kept rolling. History was being recorded. When it was over, Caleb sagged forward like he'd run a marathon. I pulled him into my arms and held him while he cried, my shirt damp with tears I didn't try to stop. You did so good, I whispered. You were so brave. Months passed. Motions were filed. Evidence stacked up like bricks. The defense tried to argue control, stress, discipline gone wrong. None of it stuck. Because the truth was carved into wood. Because it was written into bone. Because a child had finally been allowed to speak. The courtroom doors stood open on the first day of trial, sunlight spilling across the polished floor. I stood with Caleb's grandmother, my hand resting on his shoulder. Across the room, the defendants sat stone-faced, lawyers murmuring in their ears. The judge entered. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. And at last, the truth stepped into the light. Chapter 9, Verdict. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and fear. I arrived early, as usual, Caleb beside me, holding my hand like a lifeline. The trial had dragged on for weeks, each day stretching into a lifetime of evidence, cross-examinations, and silent gasps. I had grown used to the faces of the jury, 10 strangers tasked with holding monsters accountable. But today was different. Today, the verdict would come. The gallery was full. Press lined the walls. Cameras off, but notebooks open, capturing every expression, every whisper. Across the room, my ex-wife sat rigid, dressed in black, lipstick a thin, defiant line. Her boyfriend's shoulders were square, but the tension in his jaw betrayed the cracks in his facade. Caleb didn't look at them. He kept his gaze fixed on my hand, squeezing it once, twice. I felt the small, nervous tremor in his fingers, the same tremor I'd felt the night I pulled him from that basement. The judge entered, robes swishing, papers in hand. Silence descended like a heavy blanket. Everyone stood. The judge gestured to remain seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, voice steady, deliberate. Have you reached a verdict? The foreperson rose. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were steady. We have, Your Honor. My stomach clenched. Caleb's grip tightened on my hand. I swallowed. Read the verdict, the judge instructed. The foreperson took a breath. On the charges against the defendant, Elizabeth Harris, she said, her voice quivering slightly under the weight of words, the jury finds the defendant guilty on all counts, including murder in the first degree. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My ex-wife's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Her hands trembled on the table. For the defendant, Michael Carter, the foreperson continued, the jury finds the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. The minimum sentence is 35 years, with life imprisonment as the maximum. I felt Caleb stiffen beside me. I held him tighter. The room was full of people, but it felt like we were the only ones there. Every eye turned toward the defendants. The weight of the truth, carried by a 10-year-old boy, had crushed their lies. The defense attorneys shifted uncomfortably. They had tried to paint a picture of stress, miscommunication, and misguided discipline. They had tried to argue that Elizabeth Harris was a controlled and manipulated individual. None of it had stuck. Caleb's testimony had cut through every attempt at rationalization. His small, trembling voice describing the basement, the restraints, Sophie's final days, His courage had filled the courtroom, leaving no room for doubt. The judge continued with procedural instructions, but my mind had already drifted. I was aware of the gravity of the sentence, aware of the scales of justice finally tipping, but the relief I expected didn't come. It was heavier than relief. I had imagined this moment for months, the arrests, the evidence, the trial, the sentencing, but it wasn't the cinematic victory I had thought it would be. Justice had come, yes, but it carried a weight that made the air in the courtroom feel suffocating. I thought of Sophie, of Caleb, of the 47 tally marks scratched into that beam, each one a day of terror. Justice had been served, but the void left by her absence remained unfillable. Caleb squeezed my hand again. I looked down at him. His eyes were tired, but there was a small spark, a glimmer of trust, of safety, of survival. That spark was everything. Outside the courtroom, reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. Cameras flashed. I felt the press coverage like static in my chest, but I didn't care. My world had condensed into the seat beside my son, the small hand I held, and the knowledge that he would never be chained again. We left the courthouse quietly, despite the chaos around us. The sun was high, sharp and bright, illuminating the streets in a way that seemed almost cruel. People moved past us, lives continuing, oblivious to the gravity of what had been revealed. Caleb leaned into me as we walked to the car. I felt his warmth and the slow, uneven rise and fall of his breath. For the first time in months, he didn't flinch at the sound of a door slamming or a car horn. For the first time, he seemed alive in a way that didn't carry constant fear. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave my shoulders in a single, long breath. But I didn't feel triumphant. There was no elation, no sweet satisfaction. Justice had been done, yes, but at a cost that no sentence could ever repay. I thought of the life we had lost, of Sophie, of the months Caleb had endured alone, of the stolen years that no amount of therapy could truly recover. Life without parole in 35 years felt meaningless against the months of torture, against the absence of laughter that had once filled our house. Yet there was something else, a fragile, cautious hope that had begun to bloom. Caleb's survival, his testimony, his courage. That was real. That was something we could carry forward. That spark, small and trembling though it was the only victory that mattered. We drove home in silence. Caleb rested his head against the window, watching the city blur past. I kept my hands on the wheel, knuckles white, mind replaying the trial, the faces of the jury, the calm authority of the judge, and the terror I had seen reflected in my son's eyes during the testimony. Time passed. Days turned into weeks. We returned to therapy sessions. We talked about Sophie in careful, gentle ways. We navigated the world slowly, deliberately, aware of shadows but determined not to let them swallow us. The weight of justice, the gravity of the verdict, lingered. It was a reminder that monsters sometimes looked like people, that evil could hide behind a familiar face, a smile, a casual cruelty. But it also reminded me of the resilience of those who survived, of the courage it took to speak truth in a world that preferred silence. The verdict had come. The law had been served. But the true work, healing, protecting, living, had only just begun. And as the sun set that evening, golden and relentless, I realized that justice was heavy. It was necessary. It was right. But it was not satisfaction. Satisfaction, I understood, would come only in time, in small victories, in Caleb laughing without fear, in remembering Sophie not for the way she died, but for the way she fought to protect her brother. Chapter 10, because she was here. 2 years had passed, and time had a way of softening the sharpest edges, though it never erased the scars. The apartment I now called home wasn't much, but it was ours. Caleb ran ahead of me in the mornings, backpack bouncing, hair falling into his eyes, laughter spilling from him like sunlight. It was a new sound, untethered, unburdened. "Dad, wait up," he called, spinning around on the sidewalk, nearly tripping over his own sneakers. I laughed, though it was tentative, careful. "Easy, Speedy. I said, catching him by the shoulder. You're going to wear those shoes out before lunchtime. He grinned, breathless, and darted forward again. I let him go, watching him weave through the small group of kids waiting for the bus. Friends. For the first time, he had friends. Not fake ones, not ones dictated by circumstance, but kids who liked him for him, without strings or threats. Therapy had helped too. Weeks of talking, drawing, even silence had slowly untangled the knots in his chest. I watched him grow stronger, little by little, each day a tiny reclamation of the childhood that had been stolen from him. Grandmother often joined us on weekends, her voice soft but firm, coaxing laughter and stability back into our lives. He's a fighter, she said one afternoon as Caleb explained for the 10th time how his science project volcano would erupt. Your father's proud. I'm proud. And you're unstoppable. Caleb smiled shyly, shoulders straightening, his confidence blooming in the small acts of everyday life. Climbing the jungle gym, asking a teacher a question, even just raising his hand. Yet every week, rain or shine, we went to the cemetery. Sophie's grave was tidy, small flowers marking the place where the world had failed her, but where her memory lived vividly for us. Caleb had started to talk to her quietly, not in anger, not in grief, but in the way a child would speak to someone who was always listening. Hi, Sophie, he said one afternoon, kneeling by the stone, brushing a small hand over the letters carved into granite. I had a good day. I made a new friend. We played soccer. I didn't get scared at all. I knelt beside him, my hand resting on his shoulder. That's my boy, I said softly. He looked up at me, eyes wide, hopeful. Dad, do you think she knows? I raised an eyebrow, heart tightening. Knows what? That she saved me? I swallowed, a lump forming. The image of her scratched words, 47 tally marks, her bravery living in the dark, still vivid in my mind. Yes, I said quietly. She knows. She was there for you, even when no one else could be. Caleb smiled faintly, a glow of reassurance passing between us. For a moment, the weight of all we'd endured lifted slightly, carried away by something Sophie had left behind, a small, irreplaceable proof of love, courage, and survival. Back home, our lives settled into a rhythm. Weekdays were for school, therapy, homework, and slowly restoring normalcy. Evenings were for cooking together, reading stories, laughter creeping back into our apartment like water seeping through cracks in a wall. One night, as Caleb climbed into bed, I tucked the blanket around him, brushing hair from his forehead. You know, I said, voice low, Sophie's bravery taught me something. He tilted his head, curious. What? That monsters don't always look like monsters, I said. And sometimes you have to trust your instincts. You have to act when something feels wrong. One choice, one night, one kicked-in door can change everything. Caleb nodded solemnly, the kind of understanding that a child shouldn't need, but somehow had earned. I kissed his forehead, lingering. Because of her, I said softly, you're here. You're alive. You have your life back. He closed his eyes, letting the words sink in. Because she was here, he whispered, almost to himself. I smiled, a mixture of grief and gratitude pressing together in my chest. Yes, I said, because she was here. The days continued to pass. Autumn came with its crisp air and amber leaves. We raked together, laughed together, even carved pumpkins. The world was still imperfect, and we carried our scars, but there was life. There was movement forward. There was healing. On Sundays, Caleb and I continued our ritual at Sophie's grave. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we were silent. Sometimes we laughed at the smallest things, birds landing too close, squirrels chasing each other, but always we remembered. Hi, Sophie, Caleb said one day, brushing a hand over the cool stone. Thanks for helping me be brave. I like being brave now. I like being me. I rested my hand on his back. You are brave, I said. All on your own. But she gave you the first push. He smiled, small and genuine, and I felt a wave of relief and pride crash through me. Later that evening, as I closed the door behind us and tucked him into bed, I paused. The echoes of the past were still there. Yes, memories that would never fade, but they had been tempered by survival, courage, and love. We had come through darkness. We had faced monsters that wore familiar faces. And we had learned that light could exist even after unimaginable darkness. Caleb's breathing steadied. I linger a moment longer, thinking of Sophie. Her life was short, cruelly cut off, but her courage endured. She had left a mark, not just on wood in a basement, but on our hearts on the course of our lives. I whispered her name softly, letting the words carry into the quiet of the night. Sophie, we remember. We live because you were here. And outside, beyond our small apartment, beyond the routines, the therapy, the slow work of healing, I felt it clearly. Her legacy, carved into time and memory, had saved her brother. Because she was here, because she was Caleb lived, because she was we survived. And because of that, we would carry her courage forward every single day.